Hey y'all, it is Moonlight Cowboy, and today I'm going to be walking you through two things. The first thing is kind of the easier one of the two, and that is going to be how to add the windows and doors to the Western Movie Set Facade, or, the thing that you get from the Wild West Showdown that, nobody ever uses. The other one is going to be like a super overcomplicated build that I did with it. But I will also, while going over that build with you, I will also tell you that you can do it way easier than the way that I did it. I overcomplicated it because I want it to look a very specific way, but you can do it way easier. So for the first part of this, I'm just going to kind of walk through how to add the doors and the windows to the facade set. I also want to use this moment to give a little shout out to Fuzzbrain, who was the first one that I know that added doors to it. So what I did there, if you noticed, is I added a little bit of a spacer between the foundations, right? So I moved one over a little bit. And what this did is it gave me a way to double wall this. Now, what's really cool about these facades are that they're snappable to foundations, which is glorious. So I just got to make a little bit of an adjustment here, move it over just a little bit more, like so. That way they're not clipping through each other. And as we'll see when I add this next foundation, it should get it to where both sides are covering up that boarding house part. So for me, I didn't want to be like locked into that. I guess you could do it the other way too. But anyhow, so we know now that we have those placed. We can place those. So I put these other foundations as kind of a placeholder out to the outside. So there's still that gap if I were to combine those again, but I'm creating one in the middle to where it's like kind of in between the two gaps. You see what I'm talking about? And the reason I'm doing this is because I want my doors and windows to go kind of in the middle. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a door. And to do that, I'm adding a wall, and I'm adding a door. And then I'm going to change that wall type to like just a regular wall instead of a doorway. And yeah, now I have a door there. Now I'm going to change this to another style of door. I like the ones that go sideways like that, like say the rail car or the prison car, things like that. You could also destroy the door too, and this will work the same way. But for ease of use, I just do with this door. So next I am adding, if you noticed, I use catwalks to move my foundation over just slightly. So that way I can add my two more walls side by side. And I'm going to add two more doors. And I'm going to do basically the same thing. So basically I have a door at half a foundation length increments. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to convert those doors over to a door that I know I can snap this through. Or, again, I could have destroyed them as well. So either dealer's choice, right? And that's how that part's going to look. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of put my foundations back where they were initially. And I'm going to leave that one there, the one off to the side, as kind of a placeholder. So now, when I place these in, or place these things back here, I should say, my doors will be in the perfect spot. And the way I add windows is I have a couple of doors that can be converted to the glass doors. Like so. And that means I can turn them into windows. So I haven't seen anybody else do this before with the glass doors like this, at least this systematically. So one other thing to note too, we want to add upstairs. Now this, you only have to worry about this with the boarding house one. The rest of them are all 1-story, but this is the only one that's 2-story, and we want to add glass windows to it. So first thing I'm doing is I'm adding a roof there just to kind of gauge how low I need the doors to be. And I'm going to remove these things again, because again, I have these foundations. They're going to remain off to the side as placeholders. And I'm going to turn these doors back into the other style of doors, or again, in your case, you could destroy them. And then that way I can just snap this thing back and forth, the facade. And what I'm doing is I'm lowering the foundation just a little bit to what I kind of saw was that distance that the roof had, plus a little bit more, just so I have a little bit of extra there. We're going to remove those middle foundations. I'm going to leave the back ones there as my placeholders. And then what I'm doing here is I'm basically adding a second floor. And I'm going to do the same thing with the doors. But I don't need to do the middle one anymore because I only needed that for the doorway at the bottom. But if you see here, I'm adding my doors. And I'm doing them just the same thing. I'm just going to go ahead and remove those walls. And turning these doors in, converting them back to the other door that I prefer to use. And now I'm going to put my little facade thing back. Whoop, there we go. And still have my spacer there and everything because I kept those foundations in place. Now, you're going to see an issue that I'm going to have. And you might have this issue too. And this is if for some reason you are just slightly off with that foundation, the doors will pop out a little bit on one side of this build. And to fix that, there's two ways you could do that. One would be to go back to that foundation we just did and just move it over slightly. But if you're lazy like me, what you would do, see they pop out, see that there's that black frame on the outside. I don't want that. The other thing you can do is just, you can either move that floor, the upper floors, and do it over again and just move it over slightly, or you could just move the facade a little bit to compensate for it. And in this case, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to move the facade a little bit. And to do that, I'm just going to make a little micro adjustment here to that foundation. Not much, because it's barely poking out. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And prior to this, I checked to make sure that it wouldn't pop out on the other side, and there's plenty of room based on the way the window frame was that I knew it wasn't really going to pop out. Alright, so now I just remove these again, go through the tediousness of turning these doors back. I'm going to fast forward through it a little bit, just because I think you get it at this point. And then once that is done, I add my facades back. And this time, I know that the windows will not be popping out on the other side. I call them windows, but we know that they're glass doors. And you don't have to use those glass doors. They could be the other glass doors as well. I just think those look the best. But if you don't have them, the other ones will work as well. You could also do things like shutters or something else, like another, like to make it look like it's boarded off too. A door type like that. But yeah, I think that looks dynamite. One catch with this is that these are 1.5 foundations wide. So what that means is if you want to make this build really easy, you're going to do one side by side. So like you'll do side by side ones. So that way you go 3 foundations wide. Now, and that would be the easy mode to do this. As you can see, rather than doing the upper floor part, if you use any of the other facades, it's all the same dimensions. So you can do the same trick with pretty much all of them, and then just add windows if you don't want to go for the 2-story one and make it that much easier. The only catch is, see that thickness there? You might have to play with the depth on where you put those foundations to get that thickness right, because some of them are a little bit thicker than others. So, as I was saying, if you go too wide, you're going to have it'll be 3 foundations wide, since they're about 1.5 wide for each one, except for a couple of them. I don't do that, of course, because it's me. I have to overcomplicate things. My friend Lady H, who's also an awesome builder, once said of me that I like to go, when I'm building, I go around the world to go next door. And that's because I find ways to make things even more challenging just to get a little bit extra, or maybe do things way harder than they actually have to be. And this is a perfect example. This build is going to be a perfect example of that. So knowing full well that you can then do them side by side and go 1.5 or 3 foundations wide with 2 of them side by side, I kind of do that, but then I get super complicated with it. So I'm skipping through a little bit of the front because you guys know how to add the doors and the windows for it. I'm just kind of showing you the setup for it. But what I'm going to do that's going to make this complicated that you don't have to do is I want to go the exact height of the facades, which is about, for the tall ones, it's about 2 and maybe like a quarter or a half of a half wall high. But I really wanted to get to the top of that height, and for the smaller ones, it's about 1 and a little less than half of a wall height, or half wall height. So I end up making these walls and the roofs to match the dimensions of basically these facades, which means it's going to take a lot of custom wall work and a lot of custom roof work to make that work. But the end result came out really good. But as you see here, what I'm going to do too is even though they're going to be kind of next to each other, I'm also going to add a little bit of depth. So I'm going to offset the smaller one and bring it back by about a half a foundation length. And I'm going to do the same on both sides. So another key piece to this too is I also go through the trouble of adding the facade on both, like kind of the front door and the back door on both facades. You don't have to do that either. Like say you're doing like a Western town, you wouldn't have the facade on both sides. But for the purposes of the house that I did, which is more of like a revitalized like modern style or contemporary style, I felt it was important that it kind of matched on both sides. But like I said before, I'm doing that same little wall trick, or I'm sorry, door trick, excuse me, and I'm going to add the facade back there. Don't worry, it gets daytime here soon, so it gets a little easier to see. But I do build on all hours of the day. I don't wait for it to become day to build. But with that said, with this being offset like this, it gave me a lot of play to be able to do some cool things. As you'll see, I do like a kind of a glass half walls going up, but they're cut in half down the side to bridge that gap between the offset of these walls, which I thought gave it a really nice effect. Again, you don't have to do any of those things. The key pieces in this again are just making sure that you are making the adjustments on the foundations, so that way the doors they don't pop through one side or the other of the facades. I always want to call them like the Wild West Showdown walls, because you kind of get them from the Wild West Showdown event. But anyhow, that's just me. So kind of the purpose of this, the way that I wanted this build to look, is I was kind of thinking that this would look like a side garage, but it didn't end up coming out that way. But I ended up making it look like, even though that there's like basically 2 front doors, 2 back doors, I fenced it in so that way it wasn't so like so obvious. But as you see, I'm just adding the final glass doors to the front, and the fronts are done. So now for those of you who want to add the facades going backwards, the good news is you already have, for the back door side, you already have the foundations in place to do that. All you really need to do is just walk them back. So you already had them spaced exactly the way you wanted them to. And all I did was I took those spacings and I'm just walking them back, and then you'll see here, there's going to still be a little bit of a gap between the 2 foundations right there, and that's the perfect gap. So like I already know that that's going to be 3 foundations, or 4, I can't remember how long I did it, but I believe it was 3 foundations back. I don't know, it's hard to see. Sorry about that. But either way, because I already had those foundations mapped out that way, it was real easy for me to get these back here. And I do the same thing for this other side as well. But I'm going to go a little bit shorter because I want to be super complicated with myself. And I'm going to do that same offset on the other side. So really the smaller platform, or the smaller facade, excuse me, will be 1 foundation shorter, but it's broken up in halfway offset in the front and then halfway offset in the back. So that way it's going to be 1 foundation shorter altogether. But again, doing the same door trick here with that to get those those facades into place. I always want to say that's what's really throwing me off today, is because facade and foundation, like in my brain, they kind of just, They're kind of the same word, I guess, right now. It could also be that when I'm recording this, it's a little bit past my bedtime. So anyhow, as you see, the same trick worked. I was able to walk it back and do exactly the same thing and get my glass doors as windows in place. And again, this could be like the stopping point for you. You could just add your walls and you won't care about how high the roofs are. And you could probably just go across there, or you could use the same facade on both sides, so that way you just had the same roof line. Of course, I had to make things like super difficult. All right, so I'm working on getting the walls in place for this one, or I'm sorry, the foundations in place for this one, and making sure that the offset is correct for the to do double-sided on that. So it was like a touch off when I did it. So it's just, I have the foundations in place correctly. I just got to move them around a little bit. And now I'm adding my doors to the back one, and that'll be the final one that I have to do. Again, you might end up having to make a few corrections to this, but it's not the end of the world. Like, you've seen me do the trick now, daytime, nighttime. It's all kind of the same thing. It's pretty relative. And then I'm just going to add my other doors here. So it makes it pretty easy. So, while we're waiting for that and we're watching me do this yet again, I do want to say that what made this especially difficult, there's two parts to this. So I know I mentioned it being overcomplicated and me wanting to get to the top, kind of that roof line on those facades. So in order to do that, what I end up doing here is I meet them up at the top with the walls, and then I take the walls down past the foundations, and then I break the walls so that way I can run my foundations through, just to give you kind of a look ahead of what I'm going to be doing. And then for the roofs, since the facades are 1.5 foundations wide, that means my roofs had to be kind of merged together a little bit. But then I made some micro adjustments to my roof so that way they didn't flicker at top, because one thing I try and avoid at all costs is the flickering. But if you see here, the doors were completely clipping through that facade, so I'm just going to make some adjustments on my facade. This has a pro and con. Just changing off the facades, or the distance of the facades and making them a little closer, or changing that, makes it really easy to do this. But what the challenging part is, and what I find out later in this build, is I'm actually changing the differential between how far away I am from the other facade, which means that the walls will end up not being a perfect 3 or 4 wall difference between, distance between the two. So that means I'll end up having to do some pretty creative wall merging to make that work, because once I'm that deep into the build, I'm going to just find another way around if I can. If I can't, I will scrap the whole thing or go back to that step. But in the meantime, I'm blissfully ignorant, and I go ahead and I just change the distance of the facade so that way it aligns with my doors, so I don't have to go through the door process, because sometimes being lazy isn't always the best way. But as you see here, what I did is I lowered that foundation again, just like before, so that way I can get the upper windows or doors, as they're doors, but we're calling them windows. We're going to get those up into the facade and get them prepped. So now we run into a problem, which is that I can't get my walls in. So I can just easily delete that one and then turn those doors back into the doors that I know that I can get my prefab to, or I could have just destroyed them as well. Prefab the facade. I'm going to call it everything but a facade. Please know that that's just me being tired. Basically, if it sounds like I'm talking about the facade, I'm probably talking about the facade. Again, my apologies. So we got our doors in place for the upper floor of the facade. I think I should, it's like a swear jar. I should just be putting money into the thing, and every time I don't say facade, I earn myself $1. All right, so now that we got our doors in place, we're going to check to make sure that facade is going to fit correctly where it needs to go. And this could take you a couple tries too. It's kind of why I left it like this, because I wanted you to see like what the workarounds were. But if you notice, I just checked the door to see if it was coming through on either side, and it wasn't. So I'm going to take this as my opportunity to put this one back now that I got my other one into place. So I changed the doors over. And yeah, we'll go ahead and do that one. I chose that as my side set, the apothecary version of the facade, because it also has the framed in white windows. There are a couple of the facades that don't have the framed in windows, but you know, again, dealer's choice of what you want to do. And yeah, so let's go ahead and change these doors back. By the way, this is like another hour-long tutorial, so I apologize. But I've also gotten a couple of comments recently that like I sped through things too fast. So this is, I guess, my attempt at trying to not speed through them so fast. But I do limit my videos to no more than an hour. I don't even know if I can make a video longer than an hour. You know, so there might be some parts ahead that, you know, I kind of breeze through because it's more like double walling and stuff. And like at this point in the game, if you're not really knowing how to double wall, it might be a different issue where you might need to catch up on some tutorials, which I have a ton of. I have like I want to say it's like over 40 or over 50 now. So please feel free to peruse those if you struggle with double walling and some of those techniques. So you know, getting your facade can be a process, getting it aligned correctly with the doors, and then making sure that like there's no gap between the facades. And that's what I'm working on now. So now it looks like there's no gap. But I used the wrong facade. All right. But this one should do the trick. Oh, they're too close. Which means I'm going to have to move one of the foundations back. Hopefully it'll be good after that, though. But these are the same problems y'all are going to be running into when you're doing it, so it's good that you guys get to see that I do it. I had a comment recently that's it was really awesome. Somebody said that they're like, you know, sometimes it's discouraging because it looks like you get your, you know, when I'm doing like my first placements or stuff, that I get things done on the first try. And I was like, well, that's the beauty of video editing, because I'm not going to, show you the 15 minutes of me struggling, maybe dropping some swears, like why I can't get it placed correctly. Because, I'm the same as you guys in a lot of ways. Even though I'm a perfectionist and it looks like it doesn't mean that I didn't like just, get sweaty trying to do it. And this is the example of that. I still, there are times where I struggle with getting it aligned and being perfect, but the goal is for me, like, it's got to be a showpiece, because otherwise, why the hell would you guys watch my stuff if it like looks half-assed, right? So as you see, it's just making those adjustments with the foundations, and also, like, again, I could have probably just changed the doors around so I didn't have this issue. And then I see that there's a gap there, so that means I got to go just slightly closer again. And hopefully, by the time I'm done with this, we will have this last one in place. Good news is, once this is in place, then we can get to the really hard stuff that I end up doing with this build. You could have gone 2 walls high, like I probably should have, but no, I had to meet the top of the facade. So again, once you can do this part, like, for those of you who don't want to do the advanced version of this, you could just do like the easy mode version, and probably you'd be much smarter than I was, and you would have like maybe 1 or 2 less gray hairs than I do now after doing builds like this. All right, so now that those are in place, woo! All right, so now I'm using the foundations to make sure that the walls are going to sit inside of that white line. I want them to sit just behind it. I don't want the walls to pop out. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to move this foundation in ever so slightly, so that way they sit in the right place. And because I didn't screw with these facades like I did the other ones, I know they're going to be exactly 3 walls wide. And the other one is going to be 4 walls high, or so I hope, but it's not really because I messed up the distance without even thinking about it. So that's where you could probably do your wall height right there. Is that third wall high? You still cover up the windows, of course, because I'm going to go the extra mile. We're going to measure out exactly where that height of that wall needs to be. So for this, I lowered that foundation a little bit, and I'm checking to see that my roof is going to be the right height for it. The other thing too is I used full walls right there. I end up using half walls because I wanted to use the specific window, which was the House of Tomorrow window because of the nice white frame those the small windows have on that. So if you notice now, those foundations are much lower than the facade are because now what I did is I got that roof to be that height, but now I want to have the walls not raise higher than the roof. The other thing I want to do too, because I've got to really overcomplicate this build, is I'm going to move that foundation in a little bit here in a minute because I want the roof to, I don't want the wall to stick out past the roof either. So I move that foundation in. See how those walls stick out? I end up fixing that by moving that foundation in because that's gonna drive me nuts. But the key first is to make sure that it's the right height for the roof line up there, which I think it looks pretty good as far as the height goes. It's not gonna create any problems. All right. So again, it's just going to take a lot of micro adjusting. I end up going a little bit further out on the roofs. So what I'm doing is I'm setting up the roofs again, so that way they're more in line with the facades. Basically, I'm going to use like these roofs because they have that white edge, and I kind of want them to match the facade. So I'm going to make sure, see how they're like almost perfect with the facade now. Again, this is why you don't have to do all of this nonsense. Whereas I wanted it to line up so perfectly. And now that I have it like that, I'm going to look at putting in my walls now. See, now my walls don't overlap with the roof. There's actually a slight overhang with the roof. That was the whole goal of that exercise. And yeah, I think that looks pretty sharp. Of course, this means that on the back end, I'm going to end up having to do a lot of work to make this work. Because I've got to make a bedroom, I've got to make a bathroom. So that means I'm going to have to put doors on. And I do that in a super convoluted way too. Really, I guess at the end of the day, what I'm kind of trying to tell you is don't follow, like this tutorial, I made it a lot harder than what it was. Hopefully you can look at this, and if you followed a lot of my builds and my tutorials, you'll be like, man, you could have done this a little easier. I'm not following this completely. So what that means for you, and again, something I've said in a lot of my tutorials, is that, these aren't necessarily for you to copy the entire tutorial to make it exactly how I made it. It's more of an ideas guide for how you can make it your own. Because, as cool as it would be to build the same exact build that I have, I want you guys to be able to do your own style, right? That's why I never really show the decor. I'll show you how I do some of my decor, or some merge ideas, but I don't really show you me decorating the whole darn thing because it's got to be your camp. But that said, I'm going to show you how I get through my struggles that I create here. Of course, because I have to make it a lot harder on myself. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm adding my second roof. So I destroyed that first roof. Then I added, I raised it, I destroyed it, I added a half wall, I added 2 catwalks, and then I added another half wall. And what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to bring over that roof over to the other side there. And the other thing that you'll notice with that too is see that there's a line there. That's because I messed with the foundation to try and raise it up a little bit. Because what I don't want to have is the flickering on the top of the roof. So what I'm doing to make that happen is I'm kind of making these like little micro adjustments to the foundation to kind of raise and lower them ever so slightly, because it only has to be just like by like a pixel. And if you can change the roof height by a pixel, you won't see the lines in it, and you're going to see a perfect example of that in a minute. But I made a couple of adjustments. I'm going to do the same thing again. That's why I didn't cover it super extensively a moment ago. So what I did is, because I made those adjustments, I'm going to destroy this roof, right? The roof that's there, because I'm going to go 1.5 roofs wide. And then once I destroy that, I'm going to add a half wall to the top of the new roof that I just placed, not the one that's destroyed. I'm going to add 2 catwalks, or like 1 medium length catwalk. I'm adding a half wall, and now I'm adding this other roof. And because of the way I did that and I destroyed that roof, those roofs are now 1.5 roofs wide. And when I remove this catwalk, you are not going to see any lines there, and you are not going to see any flickering. If you were to see a line, because certain roofs, like even if it's off by a pixel, it will be, it's still way better to see a thin, like micro light white line or something than to see a giant portion of your roof flickering, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people would agree. So now that I got my roofs in place for this portion of the build, I'm going to go ahead and add my half walls. And because in this particular build I do want to do double walls on this, I'm going to destroy them all. I'm not going to make you sit through the destroying of them all. I turn them all into the brick set, the brick half wall set, which, as we know, you can double wall once they're destroyed. And I'm just adding the second portion of that. And then now that side of the walls are basically complete once I convert them to whatever wall I want, which, like I said, I wanted to use the House of Tomorrow wall because it is those nice white framed windows which will match the facades that I have. I don't do the bottom layer because that half of that bottom layer is going to be sunk into foundation, right? Because as we see, it goes lower than the facade, so I'm going to end up destroying those and running the foundations through the walls. And so that is one side that's enclosed. I work on the other side in here doing kind of the exact same thing. I'm not going a full wall length across or a full wall and a half. I'm going one full foundation, which cuts me directly between the window and the door. And I have a reason for this. I'm going to end up doing a hallway through here. You could go 1.5 walls, or 1.5 foundations wide and still be just fine. But I'm also going to do the same kind of half wall thing here, so it's going to also be double walled. So I'm just going to go ahead and destroy those. Sometimes I use roofs to kind of go off of roofs to go lower to destroy it. Sometimes it'll just be tables, and I'll just stack them on tables. Now, they do have, and by the time this gets released, they'll probably have that perk card changed to Wrecking Ball where you can just destroy it yourself. For me, I'm still going to have to use these things, the flamethrowers, because I'm a bow build on all 5 of my characters, and it's laughable how much damage I don't do to my walls and things. It's actually annoying. So on this, at first I had decided that I was going to put my walls kind of here, or like my doorways here. So I would go ahead and remove those half walls right there by turning those into the Blue Ridge set. But later on, I'm going to end up adding those back because I'm going to do my hallway a little bit differently. But just to give you some concept, what I was going to do here was I was going to have an overhang there, and then put my doorway through that wall, do a little wall merge magic. But for now, all I'm doing is I'm double walling the top part of that wall. And to do that, I'm just going to add, I destroyed that top wall, and then I'm adding the half wall, and then I'm turning these into the Blue Ridge to get rid of it easier, the bottom ones. This Blue Ridge set, if you don't have it, like, stop whatever you're doing, and if you have the atoms to get it, unless you don't have catwalks, like, get catwalks first. But after the catwalks, like, the Blue Ridge set should be like second or third on your list of things to get. So yeah, I've got this next part kind of walled in. Again, that's where that big wall is, where these walls are that I'm putting now end up being where my doorways are here in a little bit, as you will see. But just showing you that I mirror the same side over there. It's kind of the same technique. So for those of you who do want to mirror this build a little bit, you can just do this, and if you decide that you want to keep your doors there, that's fine too. So in that particular case, I used the tables to put my flamethrower on, and now I'm just removing those half walls from underneath. On a side note, hopefully the Blue Ridge set still works, this trick, by the time we get to it, by the time this video comes out, but I do get a lot of people that don't know how that works, because I got a lot of people that say this trick doesn't work anymore, and it's not because it doesn't work anymore, at least as of the making of this film. So, just make sure before you reach out and say something doesn't work anymore that you actually look to see how it's done. Just please. Anyhow, so one trick that I do, if I can't move a foundation somewhere, sometimes what I'll do, like see right there, I can't move the foundation because there's things in the way. Or maybe the ground is messed up and it won't let me put catwalks for whatever reason. As you will see here in a minute. Nope. What I'll do instead of trying to place things with catwalks or using like foundations or catwalks as a placeholder, I'll use a wall as a placeholder so I can just snap a foundation back to it to put it back into place, you know, just as a handy dandy little trick. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to create kind of two sets of walls here. I want a wall that works as like an overhang underneath that roof set, and then I'm going to do a larger wall to kind of meet up with this other taller facade. So in order to do that, I'm going to create 3 half walls that are going to line up with the top of that roof height. But first I'm going to check to make sure my roof height is going to be correct. So that looks good. And it's really the exact same process that I used in the last one with the other roofs. So this won't be super overly complicated. I'm not going to go through the whole shebang with it like I did with the last one, because you just watch me do it. And it's the same methodology. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to work on getting those. We got our walls in for the first part of the build. Now we're going to get those upper walls in that I was talking about, because I want to make sure that there's no light gaps in the top when I'm meeting these walls between the 2 facades, since I decided not to snap them together and I decided that I was going to do them offset like this. This is the way that I came up with to make this work. So, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about here in a minute. I want to make sure that these walls are flush with the top of the roof and as close to the facade as I could get them without going through the facade. They're basically going to be like my gasket between the 2 facades. Alright, so I'm just going to change up that placement of that foundation slightly to get it a little bit closer and raise it up just slightly to meet the level of the top of the roof. The reason being is from the outside I want it to look flush with the wall instead of it being roof, a little bit of a dip and then going up to the next wall. So again, not something that you would necessarily have to completely focus on. But for me and my OCD, I did. So that's just not high enough for me. So I'm going to go and raise it up a little bit more and change the distance on it a little bit. Well, first I changed the distance on it first. And then I think I go up a little bit more in the height. Yeah, see like if I were to stop it right there and you were looking at it from the top view, it would you would see like kind of this dip down between the wall, and then it would go straight up into the other wall. So again, being too much of a perfectionist, It's a very sad life for me. And I'm going to go a little bit higher than that. And that should do it once we get this in. And now you'll see what I'm talking about. This wall will be perfectly flush with the top of that roof. And then when you're looking at it from that angle, if you're up on top of that roof, all you're going to see is that little bar that comes through, but it's going to look like it's like a roof, like, like a seam for the roof. And then I'm going to add my walls here. I'm not going to need the middle wall for the bottom two, but for the top one, I will need it. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a full wall there, and then I'm just going to change these over into the Blue Ridge set so I can get rid of the bottom walls easier. If you don't have the Blue Ridge set, first of all, like I said, go and get it immediately if you have the means. But if you don't have it, you could have destroyed the walls too. And made it work that way. You could have destroyed the walls and then deleted the ones that you didn't need. It is a lot more of a pain in the butt to do, though. Or you could have also catwalked off of walls from the foundation from further out and placed it that way as well. This is just like the easy mode way to do it. So now that I have that, like what I'm going to call the gasket set of walls, I'm adding my next set of walls, and to get them as close as possible, I use the slant walls, or top angle walls, whatever they're called, just to get them that extra seal. You could have backed it up probably a couple of pixels and put regular half walls here, but I wanted it to be as close as possible to make sure that they sit flush. Now that you're seeing what this part looks like, you can see why the other walls are there. So that way it's completely flush with like meeting the seam on the other facade, because the facades actually have like a slight curvature to the edge to them. They're not meant to be 1000% like perfect like a regular wall is. I added glass walls on both sides, and now I'm adding these other walls because I want, you'll like where the facades, where that gap is in the facades, that's going to be glass walls like this to add in like an additional layer of light. But yeah, I think that came out really good. And if you have these little seams that come through because you're doing the walls like this, usually adding wallpaper will get rid of that. Alright, so now what I'm doing is I'm adding a little bit more of a little bit more wall to this, because you see I have like that one, like it's almost like a third of a wall sticking out of the bottom. So essentially what I'm doing is I destroyed the one wall, I'm catwalking off of that bottom wall, and I'm basically doing a double wall, so that way I can cover that gap. If that doesn't work because it's off center for whatever reason, what you can do is you can just use foundations and try and get it as perfect as possible. And then as you see here, like I said, what I did was I just went and catwalked back in, and then I added my wall. And yeah, that is not perfect. It actually, there's a little bit of a light gap on this side to the left hand side. So then what I end up doing is I end up doing the foundation thing that I just talked about. I catwalked off of that wall, and then I added a full wall down here. And by doing that, what I can do is I can snap a foundation to it, and then I can see where my alignment issue is, and I can just move it over slightly, so that way I can put that wall back into place. And this time it shouldn't have that be off center that slightly, the way that it was. And then I just catwalked back off of the wall once I moved the foundation to the half wall back over here. And then yeah, that fixed that gap right there. There's no more light gap right there. So that worked pretty well. And then what I'm going to do is so I can add my walls, because I'm going to kind of make this like a narrow hallway going down the middle. And also that's kind of my separation buffer to meet the two different facades. I'm basically adding walls underneath of those wing upper wall, like upper half walls. Again, you'll see what I'm talking about here in a few. But yeah, I basically just added my full walls down below. Now at this point in the game, this is where I'm making the decision that these are going to be where my these are going to be where my rooms are, but they're also, I'm going to change up where my doors are going to be placed in here. So first I'm going to remove this one wall, because what this does for me is it'll also make it to where my bedroom will be way bigger. And then in order to get my doors in, because now I'm realizing, oh crap, I need to have doors. I get my foundations back to the same level that they were with the facades, because it needs to match that level. So I'm getting some foundations into place, because I have a bunch of like placeholder foundations around the perimeter to save, just in case I make a mistake. And then in order to get this facade, or to get this foundation into place, what I'll need to do is I'll need to break the walls around it, because it really doesn't know where to snap to. It's like completely going haywire right now. It's like, what are you doing to me, Moon? Why do you always do this to me? I'm the game physics and you hurt my feelings. So once I have the foundation in place, what I can do is I can catwalk off of the foundation and just go around too. And I'm going to break the upper walls above it, because basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to merge the doorway. It's going to go into that space up there a little bit, not completely, but probably about halfway. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. So I'm going to double wall this. So in order to do that, I catwalked in off of that foundation, because I know that foundation's the doorway height for the facades. And I catwalked a little further out from where I want that door to be, because again, I want to double wall this. And then once I have a placeholder wall there, I can put another catwalk going back, so that way my first wall is already flipped. Getting it to go in could be a little bit of a pain, but I'm able to snap it to this catwalk, just kind of ease it in, and then I can move my catwalk to the other side right here, like this, and I can just snap my next wall in. And that's going to be my first doorway. In order to get that doorway in get the door in, I'm going to have the foundation meet it. So I'll end up destroying a bunch of walls here in a minute, so I get my foundation to move up to that level. So like I said before, if you run into that kind of problem where it turns red and it won't even snap to anything, just destroy all the walls around it. Try and make sure that they're either like the abandoned mine set, or like the corroded concrete set, or maybe even the army base set, and then you should have no problem snapping the foundation through them. And now that I have that into place, I'm going to go ahead and put one more door through here in a minute, because I want one for the bathroom too. So I'm turning these into the concrete walls, the corroded concrete walls, and I'm going to destroy those, just so I can, this time, instead of using a bunch of like chicanery with catwalks, I'm just going to raise the foundation up with this, and I shouldn't have a problem there. Boom. And now I can just add a catwalk to the foundation, so that way the first one will be flipped, going the other way. But I do still have to destroy these half walls up here, because this wall, again, will technically be merged into them a little bit, or intersecting with them. So the other way you can do this too, instead of using the corroded set, if you were using the half walls and you have the Blue Ridge set, just turn them to the Blue Ridge arches, or slant walls, and destroy those too, because just like with the other sets, those also go completely intangible, like meaning that you can snap things through them. And then yeah, now that that's deleted or destroyed, look, I can snap that, and then I just remove the catwalk off of that foundation, which gives me the autonomy to flip it the other way. And now I have the walls going both ways. It's double walled. We're good to go. I was able to change my design without completely crying, about screwing up my build. You should have already, hopefully you've already seen the hopefully you've already seen that, like the showcase, but you'll see like that's like having the thin hallway there, and that's where you go through to get to the doors. I thought was a really cool look. All right, so now we're making a couple of foundation adjustments because I want to put the walls on the outside because I've done all the other walls. I'm done with doorways. We're just going to do the other side. And remember, I said these walls are the facade or like the facade distances changed because I moved that last facade around so much. So these walls will not be perfect. So I did three. It should be four full wall lengths, but it was really like three or 3 3/4. So I use this as an opportunity to add some glass wall accents in between the walls. So I just had to do some custom movement of my foundations to make that happen. But it was pretty easy to do. If you didn't screw up like me, you wouldn't have to worry about that. And then once I was done with that, and I added those the glass walls like that, all I'm doing now is I'm adding my walls underneath, because I still need my walls to go underneath the like to be lower than the facade. See, so in order to do that, I'm going to end up having to go underground because I want to snap walls to the bottom of the walls because it's going to go below the ground. So you'll see what I'm talking about here. I'm going to add that to the catwalk underneath, and then I'm going to go back up to FreeCam build mode. Sometimes you might have to use a different wall than the Corota. The Corota is pretty thick. And in this case, I used just whatever angled wall I had, and I changed it over. And I was able to convert it to a regular corroded wall. But see what I'm talking about? See, now that wall will go lower than the facade is. And then once I have all those walls into place, I'm just going to destroy them so I can snap my foundations through. Which is, like, funny enough, I do the floors last on this build, right? So I'm doing the same thing for all of the walls around the build. I'd already done it for the first set of walls I did on the smaller facade, but now I've just got to go around and do the rest of them. But yeah, I can just kind of catwalk underneath, snap those walls into place. Nothing but net. It's already corroded. And in that case, what I did was I used 2 half walls to get up, so I'm just removing the one that was even lower than the one that I needed. And I do the rest of them like that too. The doorways don't need to be done because the doorways are already at the height of the foundation level. And at this point, I'm just getting some extra walls destroyed, just so that way I have everything ready for this whole transition part. And I'm also going to add a couple of walls for like the dividers between the bedroom, bathroom, I believe, at this stage. By the way, I know I shouted out Fuzzbrain earlier. I am leaving a link to his tutorial. So if you want to do the same thing with the facade that I did, but you want to do like an easier build, he has a really cool Old West build that he did, which I highly recommend you check out. Back a while ago, we're talking like probably a year ago, I told him that I'd given up on trying to mess with these facades. And I was like, I wish somebody would figure it out. And he kind of figured out the door portion. He didn't do the windows at the time with the doors, but that said, like his ability to do that thing with the facade was kind of one of the catalysts for me realizing that I could manipulate this thing and take it to the next level. So without him doing that, I would have probably never really attempted this. So again, huge shout out to Fuzzbrain. He's an excellent camp builder, and I highly recommend you check out his channel. In fact, if you like quirky builds, especially like if you like the scrappy type of builds, he's phenomenal at it, like immersive. So I would highly suggest giving him a sub if you're into that kind of stuff. Definitely one of the best in the business. So what you're witnessing now, when I loaded back into the world after taking a break from working on this, I found out that the walls were the foundations will sometimes shift on builds. If you've ever seen like a gap in your foundations, that means that there was like a shift. So I just went back through and I'm realigning the walls again with the one side, just to make sure that everything's in place. So I had to redo those walls on the first set of walls that I did on the side. I just had to redo them a little bit because they were poking out through where I wanted them to be. They were poking through like the facades a little bit. But again, that one, because I didn't screw with these facades, this one was like the easiest one to do and to fix up, because they were a perfect 3 walls distance. And then after that, all the walls are going to be done with this build, which is exciting. Now we can move on to the floors, which in all honesty, the walls and the roofs were the hard part. The floors are actually going to be the super easy part. My hope is that in this admittedly overcomplicated tutorial on how I did this build, I hope that you garnered some ideas, by the way, as we're, getting closer to the end of this. I hope you're thinking about like how you can implement this and make this your own without making this like my level of craziness. Because there's a lot you can do with these facades, they definitely have a really unique look and texture to the front, and I really think that they can add to your build. But it will take some finesse to get it exactly how you want. As you saw with this, like I wanted it, like I sought out sheer perfection. For those of you who just want to enjoy like a really nice build, you can probably even achieve perfection without getting as complicated as I did with it. But the good news is, like I said, once these walls are in, we're done. So to give you some, to kind of get ahead of myself, what we're going to do is we're going to just make sure all of the walls that are foundation level are going to be destroyed, with the exception of the doorways, because those are the level that we want the foundations to be. And then what I'm going to want to do is turn the, make sure the foundations are a little offset. I don't want it to be one full foundation wide on each side of my build. Rather, I'd rather it be closer to like a half a foundation on each side, and maybe like, a half on the, on all sides, really, to be honest, or close to it, because that's where I got a little bit stuck, because part of the builds, like where like the offset, the shorter portion of this build will end up being a full foundation by that side, by the shorter side, but then the longer side will be like only a half a foundation wide. But you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. As I was saying, I'm destroying those, I've destroyed every wall that would interfere with the placement of these foundations. And then because I converted them all into the corroded concrete set, I can then start adding my floors. Now these floors are typically pretty hideous, but they're actually really good to make sure all of your floors are going the exact same way. I always try and use a textured floor for this, because you don't want to repair all, go through this nightmare again, get PTSD, just to find out that one of your floors are crooked. So if you don't have this set, there's like a milled brick floor that works really good. There's also the lightwood set. I've gotten really good at telling the lightwood set if it's going the right way, but find that set to make sure all of your floors are going the right way. But as you see, you have that thickness where it's only about a quarter to a half to a full wall length, foundation length across on those, and it gave it even more of a custom look and made it look centered. And that is kind of how it turned out. I really like the way that this looks. you know, just being a builder and walking into this, you can feel the dimensions are like a completely different than what you would normally walk into. Like you just have really good vibes from this build, and there's a lot of really good natural light that comes in. And I had a lot of room to do what I needed to do and make it feel comfortable. If you like this, I hope you subscribe. I hope you know, like this video, share it. And if not, I appreciate you at least watching and sticking it through to the end. Y'all stay safe and have a blessed day.